Welcome, one and all, to another edition of the Liveridge Project, brought to you by Run the Block. Names always pending. We never know. The name may change, but the game stays the same. How's it going, Michael? Happy Wednesday for you on this beautiful May 7th.
I'm good, man. I'm good. It is beautiful. It is definitely a Wednesday. Sun is shining here in the Midwest. We're hitting 80-degree days with our maxed out humidity, welcoming summer as usual. How's everything going on your end, man?
Allergies are full bloom. Allergies are full bloom. It's been raining a lot here, which is great, keeping down in between hot days. But then when the guys come to mow the lawn, they literally have to come once a week because the grass is like literally growing inches from week to week. And so like sometimes it's not all the way dry, and so they go to cut it and it's just these huge clumps, right? So you got to go out there and rake it. And I learned my lesson again of why I don't, go out there and rake grass. I spent probably 24 straight hours of just like a cloth over my face and just like sneezing and puffy. And I was like, I thought you were supposed to grow out of allergies. What happened? Just had to get hit in the face again with a full-blown allergy attack.
Yes. Cam ushering in another spring and summer successfully by blowing up with allergies.
Dandelions don't play games. That's what I've learned. Dandelions, they're there and they're beautiful. And then you cut a bunch of them and they're like, you know what? You cut us, we're going to cut you down. And they do that in the form of mucus and swollen eyes. Makes you wonder, veggies, good or bad? We'll get into that in just a second as well. We have a couple amazing topics today. We're going to talk, unfortunately, about the 43% of small business owners that can't pay rent at the moment, and that's across the U.S., not just locally, but technically nationwide. We're also going to talk about a popular figure showing up on a couple podcasts recently and going into why he switched from a carnivore diet to including fruits and honey. We're also going to get into a very hot topic on your end, Michael. You want to introduce that topic?
For those who aren't aware, this past month, a couple of weeks ago, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, has a new ruling. Starting in September, we're going to see the end of non-competes, and this is going to shift the entire economy. So definitely something we need to discuss.
Absolutely, because that really, if you're a small business owner, even a coach or an entrepreneur, and you're trying to hire people. If you're trying to hide people, that's a different conversation.
It's not a trafficking podcast.
Yeah,
we don't talk about hiding people.
Or there's some other things going on there. If you're trying to hire people, especially in our realm, we help traditionally coaches, and they hire other coaches, and they try to have them sign contracts even though they're 1099s and go a certain route. So this will be a big one for you guys, regardless of what business service you provide, to actually stick around and figure out what these changes and when this law goes into effect, how that could actually affect you. Let's kick off, Michael, if it's cool with you, though. Also, real quick before we get into that, I was trying to think of how we can make a more relaxed setting here, since we're not obviously in person, but we need to figure out how it can feel like we're sitting across from each other. Like, I don't know if we need like big comfy chairs. We need to, make a fake fireplace. We need to figure that out, though. That's just a side note.
Currently, the best I can offer is we're wearing matching hats, and I'm literally in a pajama t-shirt. I don't know how more relaxed I can get in this environment.
I'll allow it. All right, guys, let's go straight in to the news. And we're going to start off with small business is in crisis as rising numbers are unable to pay rent. This comes from a story from Microsoft. This is also in Bloomberg. I saw a lot of people pick this up once it was actually dropped last week. Article says a significant number of small businesses across the nation are struggling to pay rent due to skyrocketing costs. Recent study by business networking platform Alignable found. The company's latest small business rent report, published on Friday, found that 43% of small business renters in the U.S. were unable to pay their rent in full and on time in the month of April. So this is like happening right now. This isn't a few months ago. This isn't last year. This is like right now. Such a high delinquency rate hasn't been reported in the U.S. since March of 2021 at the height of the, when it reached 49%. The delinquency rate was also 4 percentage points higher than in March. So this is, again, happening now and increasing, making it the largest month-over-month surge in over a year, according to the data analyzed by Alignable. Michael, what is going on right now? There's some other key points I want to take away from this article, but just on the whole, when you hear something like that, where does your mind go?
How did we get here? How did this happen? So number one, while yes, this is urgent, and it's certainly urgent for so many people out there, I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, we're not going to look at this and point out like this is the biggest drop in 50 years. We literally only have to go back 2 years to find something similar. Well, I'm not saying it's a good thing, because certainly it's not. We were, as a country and a world, we were in dire straits back in 2021, 2020, things like that. But still, it's not like we're talking about going back to the all-out stalls of the economy in the 70s, right? So it is a little bit different. And something else that a lot of our listeners are all going to be, I'm going to say, around that 30s and above age. And, we've been around long enough to have heard this statistic passed around in different circles for years, if not decades now, about what percentage of Americans can't afford a $500 emergency, right? And that stat's been around for a long time. Now, are things getting worse? I'm going to say yes. Now, it's being disguised, but things are getting worse. And I'm going to point to this. This isn't, hard data, but I saw a poll on Valuetainment. And so Valuetainment is, it is a relatively conservative outlet, but it's very business, right? And so their audience, definitely small business owners, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, solopreneurs, all the types. And it was a brilliant question that they asked. In the past couple of years, with inflation on the rise, have you had to get a second job or start a side hustle to make ends meet? And almost 70% of people said yes. And so what we're seeing is the advent of more overtime, the advent of more second jobs, the advent of more side hustles, and people still not being able to hit that. And so if we're trying harder, if we're working more as individuals, and we're still here, what does that do long term? What does the burnout rate look like? I'm going to tell you right now, over the past several years, we've started to see it. We've started to see it when you can look at the far reach of capitalism and how we've definitely created a couple of classes here, unfortunately, and the massive protests and the rise of socialism and all of these things that are happening inside of our country, inside of our institutions. It's all a conditional response to being in this state for an extended period of time. But we haven't dealt with the perfect storm of inflation like this, and the rate of taxation where our money is essentially propping up outside countries and we're starting to get a little bit more dire because of the global situation. But as far as what is happening, it's just the same thing it's always been. People don't bet enough on themselves. They don't start their own thing, and they end up, going and doing for others all the time and taking a small percentage of what goes into the pot, right? Instead of being their own boss, instead of taking up for themselves, finding their passion project, figuring out a way to productize that so they can start to live a life full of purpose that they love, and one that's also starting to, fuel them a little bit more financially. And while that poll does speak to that starting to happen where people are taking up second jobs, my question would be, how long can you sustain that? How long can you have a second thing that you don't want to be involved in, just like the first one, to make ends meet? So I think that, and we spoke about this on the first episode, man, it's going to be the advent of that second, I don't want to call it a creator economy. That's not what it is, but where we start to see people take a little bit more individual accountability and ownership with what they can do out there, I think you're going to start to see some individuals be able to claw their way out of this just because of the resources available to do so. But this is not a new problem at all, man.
Yeah, something that stuck out to me was the article said 54% of small business owners surveyed said that their landlords were also charging them more now than 6 months ago, an 11% increase. And when you're renting, typically commercial space, usually that's pre-negotiated, unless that's in your contract that, hey, at any point in time we can just see a rent increase. Because normally when you go into like lease space, at least this is my experience, if you're going to lease for 3 years, you would ask for so much, possibly up to 3 months free of rent, right? For every year, you try to get like at least 1 year free. And then you have that negotiated on those prices. So I kind of found that interesting too, that obviously in the lease agreement, they can just up your rent. Even when like personally, when I've rented personal space, like it's yearly, there's usually a rent increase and you agree to that from a year to year basis. But like if I was renting the space 3 months in and the landlord was like, hey, we're bumping your rent by 10%, I'd be like, what the heck? So, I mean, I misspoke. I think I said 11%. It's 20% rent increase. So 54% of the small business owners said their rent increased by 20%. Like that's huge. If you've ever looked at commercial space, they usually go on like a yearly average of square footage, meaning if you go to like City Feet or LoopNet, and you go to like lease a space, it'll say like X square footage per year. Once you divide that up, I just know this because I'm looking at smaller spaces right now, like $2,500 a month rent for about 1,000 square feet, even in West Virginia is about the norm. So like, let alone if you're a gym owner, which in this report, 48% of gym owners made up the I cannot pay my rent, which is insane. It's 1 every 2 gym owners are like, I can't pay my rent. And so when you start adding all those numbers up, it's like, okay, what's going on with the landlords? And if you like go down the rabbit hole of real estate, you look and see that commercial real estate prices are dropping like crazy because there's this plethora of, from what happened in the pandemic, as well as up to about 2 years ago, all these properties, personal or residential or commercial, were all overpriced because the market was small and everybody was trying to move around and relocate, and you had all these people from west going east and all these people going from east to west to like reestablish their lines. And so you had this perfect storm of all of these things. And now I just think it's all coming to a head. Right now, the amount of commercial property that's for sale, right now the amount of residential property for sale are at, literally, depending on the area, record amounts. And so I don't know if some of this is because I had, $10 million and I went and bought a bunch of commercial property 2 years ago thinking like this was my way out, and now I can't afford that. And so I'm like, well, I've either got to try and sell it, which right now the market's really not buying, or they're buying at a super low rate compared to what I paid for it, so I'm losing money, or I've got to charge these people a lot more rent. And so I think that's kind of what we're seeing here too, which is super unfortunate because I always go to is it the Campaign? It was a terrible movie, but it's with Will Ferrell and Zach Galifianakis. And there's just like clips of Will Ferrell going to like all these small towns, and he just like, right, depending on who he's talking to, he goes, farmers are the backbone of this country. And then he goes to, to like small town to oh my gosh, why am I blanking right now? We'll just say like stay-at-home moms, and he goes, stay-at-home moms are the backbone or the backbone of this country, right? And then he goes to car dealerships, and he's like, car dealerships are the back, right? He just keeps changing. So you hear all the time, small businesses are the backbone of this country, but I mean, when it comes to the overall amount, small business owners make up the majority of businesses. While you have to break down the actual taxes between corporations and small businesses, who pays the most. But you're looking at this perfect storm of the landlords, I don't think, can pay their loans. So they're charging the actual renter, which is then the small business owner. The small business owner is trying to sell their goods, but the end consumer is in more debt than ever. They can't afford their stuff, so they're either canceling memberships for services, or they're just cutting back on discretionary spending. And so it's a wild time. You're going to have to be able to pivot. I think we're going to get into community here in a little bit and culture and things like that. But you're going to have to be able to give people no other choice than to not want to cancel their services with you. Now, I'm not saying gouge them on prices or anything like that, but you're going to have to get prepared for some bumpy roads ahead.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. You hit the nail on the head. You're starting to see people not be able to make their payments. So what do? They pass the buck to the tenant, right? I know a gym owner personally in California who is not offered, and they've been in their location for years, like decades, and the owner did not offer a re-up of the lease agreement and force them to go month to month so that they have the power to do anything that they want to within that. So those interesting things tie back to, and this is a principle that I baked up a couple years back. It's the transfer of risk without the possibility of the transfer of reward. And this should never be done. Whenever we can observe this principle, and I'm sure someone has thought of this before me and already has put it in place, and it's worded better, right? This came to me literally in self-checkout. So if we think about whether it's the 08 bailout or we go back to what happened in 2020, 2021, kind of the thing that kicked off the topic that we're on, one of the things that we saw was consolidation up top to maximize and retain profit. And so they are maximizing their leverage and their potential upside, and they transfer all of the risk internal. I'm going to give you an example by the most revenue generating company on earth, Walmart. Now Walmart used to be, most of them, if not, I'll say most, 24/7. Right? And when did most of the stocking happen? On midnights. Why? No one's there. So during 2020 and 2021, they consolidated hours. They consolidated shifts. You saw your stores start to turn to 2 shifts, right? Morning and afternoon, the midnights were removed. So what does that mean? Well, all of those people who worked on midnights, who did all of the stocking, they now do that on the first and second shift. So what are we seeing? We're seeing, while you're doing your grocery shopping, you're in traffic in the bread aisle because you have 3 people putting away things in that long aisle, and you have all these customers trying to get in and out. That used to not happen for the last couple of years. What else did we see? The formation of a police state. The greeter is now the person who just looks at your receipt on the way out the door. And so now we're making the people who are supposed to be the welcoming committee into the people who are the police. And so when we do this, we are transferring all possible risk from the policy setters up top, the brass, to the people inside of the store. We've transferred the risk of the frustration of the consumer to the people making minimum wage, stocking the bread with their AirPods in because they have such a soulless job that they don't care, and the people who manage them don't care. And so this is transferring all risk of this frustration down into the reality of the people who are doing self-checkout, the people who are getting their receipts checked out on the way, because none of us ever made any of this like social agreement where I'm my own bag person, you can read my receipts to make sure I did the thing right. But this is what's happened. And so all of the risk, all of the downside has been transferred to the people working and to the consumers, while all of the maximum upside, right, profit, retention of profit, has been transferred up top. Same thing happened in 08 with the bailouts. And so whenever we see this principle in play, we should know that something bad has happened and that the people who are contributing to the situation, whether you are the person who is the employee or the contractor, you're the person doing shopping, you're the only ones who are going to be in a bad situation. All of the policymakers up top, they're going to be totally fine. And so wherever you can look and you can observe this law, this principle in place, I would suggest as a business owner to try to find a different way to do it. And it's going to be because of the topic that we go into in just a moment with what the FTC did, right? But now it's about building the right culture and the right business more than ever. Because for anyone who doesn't do that, we're going to start to see that parallel economy run because you're starting to see people push back against landlords hard, right? We're starting to see weird things with squatters happening in states. What's that going to add to this? right? What is all of the influx of taxpayer revenue going to these spiked rent rates that are being, put for people who are brought into this country? So like there's a lot of variables in it. And the downside is it's all of a transfer of risk to us at this level. That's what we have to worry about.
Yeah, so you as the business owner, if you have a contract with landlord, I would be reviewing that ASAP, seeing when your negotiations typically happen, what the landlord has the right to do, because you don't want to get hit next month with a spike that you weren't prepared for. So definitely check your contracts if you have those types of things. If you rent space, be alert. Just to sum this up, so gym owners were 48%, beauty salons 49%, tech sector 51%, and then 52% were restaurant owners. And so I think a small business is defined as, is it 500 and less employees? Is that how they define a small? Yeah. So you got to remember, like, this isn't just necessarily always just an entrepreneur or solopreneur or like somebody with 3-4 employees. This is up to that. But if you're looking at beauty salons, like beauty salons don't have hundreds of people working at a time, right? Like depending on the space, maybe 1 to 5 to 10 to 20 if it's like a legit, like, high end place. So be alert of your contracts. Make sure you understand what your contracts say. And if you are looking to actually rent space soon, make sure that, as Michael said, like, you don't just have an abrupt change where you thought you were signing a year contract at set price and it turns out it's month to month, or the landlord has the right to switch you at any point in time. So be aware, kids. All right, before we get into the FTC, I did want to quickly talk about Paul Saladino. Did you see this when he was on More Plates, More Dates with Derek Fit?
I caught highlights passing around. I didn't watch the episode, but starting to see this more and more. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went and looked real quick. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, More Plates, More Dates is with Derek Fit. You can go check out the episode. I didn't watch the whole entire episode either. But Paul was on there and he was talking about, because he was Mr. Carnivore. I think even his Instagram name, or it was like his
Carnivore
bio was
MD.
like Mr. Carnivore. And so just a quick background. He went carnivore for 2 years. And I think he actually even says on that episode, like, he's like, I just called it an animal-based diet. But he's like, I think when I was on Joe Rogan, he kind of coined the term carnivore diet and just kind of stuck. So we went with it. So there's the influence of Joe Rogan for you. But he was talking about how he went carnivore for 2 years, and then he started to notice some things happening, probably because he was in ketosis too long. And so while we don't have to get into the science and all those things there, I just thought it was super fascinating that you see someone who was like so heavily into their dogma that then was like, oh snap, like now I'm having these terrible muscle cramps. My testosterone's plummeting. Like, why would that be? I was, I'm eating organ meats and I'm doing all the things. Like, I should just be a man's man, right? I thought it was interesting to see that, because I know you and I have talked before, and it is interesting that you have a couple factors. One, I think an aging male, I think there's something there to the type of diet you can do once you get 40 and beyond. I don't have scientific proof there. I just know, I think you probably need less carbs. And this is not scientific. I don't have the proof here. I'm just saying, I think there's something that between that and then the gear you're on, because it seems like a lot of these people that love keto, when you talk behind the scenes, are like either on a testosterone replacement or, HGH. They're on some sort of cream or injection somewhere. And I'm not talking about Paul himself. I'm just talking about, like, anecdotally, people that we've spoken to and that I've spoken to. They're like, yeah, I just eat meat all the time. And I'm like, cool. What's your test? how much you inject? Because like, I just got all this energy. And I'm like, yeah, okay. What are you on, man? They start telling you. You're like, got it. But I thought it was very, very interesting that at least he was open about, and at least he was like, yeah, I think I got some things wrong, right? And it goes to this, we get into these dogmas between politics and diets for whatever reason, and religions and these things that we become that becomes our identity, versus just being like, I enjoy these things, or this thing works for me, or I really think that this thing is the most true of any of the other things, and this is what I've found to be true because of it. And I thought it was just at least great of him to come out and be like, you know what, I got some stuff wrong, and he's now speaking out more about that. And I looked, he has been doing this for a little while, but I think he's getting on some bigger podcasts now, and that's why we're kind of seeing it blow up this time.
It's always good to see a person when they can take a step back, think about their thought process, have a good, honest look in the mirror and say, like, you know what, I think I was wrong about this. Like, I thought all these things, but after being here a couple years, I noticed some side effects that I did in the first few weeks, first few months, first year. Number one, good for him, of course. Number two, sure, this was a matter of time. Principally speaking, you can't live in extremes for very long, right? Like, it's just a matter of time until something happens. Once you go to an extreme in anything, if you maintain that, bad things happen. We operate in seasons. Our environment, our planet operates in seasons. The way that we gain muscle, the way that we lose fat is best done in seasons. And so to think that any of us could live at such an extreme for a long time and not see literally any kind of downside is absolutely insane. But if we go back far enough, and I'll call it like, I don't know, maybe 10 years, a little bit less, and we look at like precursor to the carnivore, which was the advent of intermittent fasting, right? Like, if you look at those studies that they started to do all this stuff from, you're talking about types of worms and you're talking about mice that, in order to replicate the same exact situation in humans, you would have to have them not eat for 3 weeks at a time, because we have this thing that's got a 2-week lifespan versus this thing with a 70-year lifespan. So in order to replicate the very same thing, you would have had to go on a water fast for 3 weeks. And so even the advent of the stuff probably should have made people raise their eyebrows. We can take that. We can take the extremes of fasting. This is something Vince talks about often. We take too many people who are, and by the way, if you're not familiar, talking about Vince Pitstick from Vital Coaching MMU, give him a follow, especially if you want to increase your coaching knowledge in the functional world. But one of the things he talks about is, people just jump into fasting in an already stressed state, right? Like, they're just beating themselves down, and then they go right into or they go right into a fast, instead of, maybe we gear down, maybe we go keto for a little bit and prep for our fast, right? People jump into these extremes. That's fine. You can maintain that for a little bit. But if you're not ramping up, if you're not tapering off, if you're not adhering to the principles of periodization in your extremes, it's only a matter of time before degradation happens. You have to recover from stress. So yeah, it's great to see the change, and this is also the nature of science, right? Like, over time, it's just more proving what's wrong than what's right. We're starting with all of these unknowns, and eventually through testing, we're like, all right, that's now known. That's not working. That's not what's going on. So it's really process of elimination. And so it's completely understandable how things like bloodletting, right? It's valid for so long until we find stuff and we're like, maybe we should stop just draining people of blood to heal them. So yeah, man, it's great to see. It's great to see the extremes being put into perspective, and I'd love to see more people stop trying to dissuade others from eating fruits and vegetables, because that's not the problem.
Diet variation is key, right? And that's what we're talking about here. I think it's one of the things that I had to open my mind to when I started going through a lot of my like functional issues. You just think like, oh, these things are good for you, so I'm just going to eat these things. And you don't realize, like, when you don't change up what you're eating, something happens, and you start developing, for whatever reason, antibodies for these things. So you can eat eggs for 2 years, and if you eat them every single day for 2 years, you're fine. And then for some reason, 2 years and 1 day, you don't feel the same. And then 6 months later, you have a legit food allergy, and you have to like rotate your foods. I actually took in, I think it's called an MRT test, where you send blood in and they test it with different foods. So not like if you go to an allergist, they'll prick you with like different things to see what you're allergic to. This is like they test your blood to see what antibodies and stuff are present, not just immediately, but also after a few days. And they send you back like, hey, these are things you should avoid right now. These are things you should absolutely never touch again. And then, hey, here's your foods that are at a certain level. And so what we want you to do is like, they literally have you rotate every 4 days, and it's completely different things. So for 4 days, you just eat the same thing, and then you rotate, eat completely different things. That's from protein to veggies to carbs. Which I was like, man, maybe that does make sense. Maybe instead of like trying to eat, I'm just making this up. Instead of trying to eat eggs in the morning, ground beef for the afternoon, and turkey in the evening, and rotate my proteins that way, maybe it makes more sense to rotate your proteins every few days. And I think this is kind of where that nose to tail came in. Like, you just eat your way back of the animal to kind of rotate through those things. But even the protein source itself, whether it's fish or red meat or chicken or, turkey, I think that approach is where I'm at right now. And so I'll stick with a single protein source, and then I'll rotate that every 4 days. And that seems, at least for me, it's made a tremendous impact. So you are not your ideas. Your ideas are just that. They're an idea of what can actually be the best way forward. And once you're presented new facts, sure, take the scientific approach, add a new hypothesis, and test it out, and then move forward the best way possible. So I agree with you, dude. I love this. I love that he, is speaking out and saying like, hey, I'm actually doing these other things now. We need more of this in the world, especially, in the health and fitness space when it comes to the dogmas of diet culture and workouts and all these things. We know the solution's typically going to be, it's usually a mix of everything, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I thought that was super cool, and I hope to see more of this. All right, on to FTC. Drop some knowledge on us. What is going on here with the non-competes? When does this go into effect? And what on earth are we going to do about this? Or does it even matter for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs?
Yep. So I'm going to read through some of the important bullets. April 23rd, 2024, the FTC voted to finalize a new rule that's going to prohibit employers from enforcing non-compete against workers. So they determined it violates Section 5 of the FTC Act. It's going to prohibit any new non-competes with any workers after the effective date. It's also going to prohibit employers from enforcing the existing non-competes other than senior executives. We'll get into that in just a moment. And the expected date on this is September 4th, 2024. I'm going to risk misspeaking here, but I think that's related to there's like a 120-day timeline between the agreement and the enforcement. And so I think that's what that has to do with. So we're looking at this really going into place, essentially at the end of Q3 this year. It's going to, the reason why is the FTC believes that the non-compete fundamentally restricts a worker's freedom to find a better job, to start their own business, right? Like to improve themselves, because it's positioned as you cannot improve yourself through iterative competition. You agree to come here, you have to stay locked here for X period of time, for anything you create here belongs to this place and all the things, right? And so the FTC says, hey, we're at principle against monopolies, and this is the thing that actually creates monopolies. So we're going to cut it off at the pass. Okay. I mean, there's multiple viewpoints on that, but if you think about it, a lot of the contracts offered to contractors are very take it or leave it. It's here's the rates. You can't work with people in this industry for 24 months after this. And, that's where this really gets kind of crazy. And probably the reason where this becomes actually a really good thing, because if you're a specialist in a certain area and you sign a contract, take on a new position, and they're like, hey, regardless if this is a good fit or not, on the other end, you're not going to be able to go back into the area where you're an expert for 24 months and collect money. Like that would financially cripple a lot of people, because, you get good at relative skills and you stay there. So this is a good thing for the spirit of competition. It will not go into place when it comes to the sale of a business, though, right? And this is a great thing that they put that in there, because what shouldn't happen is I start a business, I scale a business. Cam, you want to buy the business? I'm like, cool. We sign the contract. You give me the hypothetical $1 million. And then the next day I call all the employees and I'm like, I'm going to go start it again across the street. Come work for me. Right? Like, that's a big no-no. That is a terrible concept. And they did protect against that from happening. And so that's a great thing. But roughly 1 in 5 Americans are 1099, are a contracted worker, right? That's 30 million people. That's also about the same ratio of people who are shift workers, which is insane. And so when this got put through, the FTC said they received over 26,000 comments on this and over 25,000 were supportive. And so we're looking at like a 96% support rate. I'm going to tell you right now, the 4% were all business owners who went and said the thing. But ultimately what they're going to hope will happen is that you're going to start to see new businesses form, right? This is where people are going to start more side hustles. They're going to start more small businesses. And I think they're expecting like a 2.7% growth. They're expecting to see healthcare costs start to come down. And so overall, the interest is to produce a more collaborative marketplace, which is a good thing. If you were to take a look at, our stock market, it's mostly driven by like 5 or 6 companies. That's a bad thing when you're not diversified, right? But those companies are so large and they own so many other companies that this has happened. And so this is actually a step towards taking that apart, building more small businesses, which is actually the cure for the principal situation that we're in. It's the rise of the individual. It's the rise of the small team, right? Like you can absolutely build a team with 100, 200 employees, and that could still have a small feel with tight teams and a great culture. And by the way, that's what's going to take from now on, right? This is actually what this ensures, is that the companies that are going to try to do the amazing thing and build a juggernaut, they're going to have to focus on culture now. You have to focus on the people who are there helping you build. And if you don't, you will lose them. And so this is a net positive win. For certain businesses, it's not great. For certain business owners, this is bad news and they're going to go out of business. However, this is the nature of the free market. This is what's supposed to happen. We've had too many things in place for too long that prevent big, bloated businesses from dying off and letting small businesses rise in their stead. And so ultimately, this is going to be a positive thing because of what it's going to allow for the individual, but also what it's going to do to companies. They're going to have to reshape the way they do things to build a truly amazing culture to retain that top tier talent more than ever. And that's a great thing because that just makes more competition. And that's what we're here for in the free market in the first place. And so overall, I think this is a great thing. But time will tell what's going to happen, but also what kind of laws get put in place on the back end to, maybe negate some of this. But we'll see what happens there. What are your thoughts with all this, man?
I just have more questions than probably opinions at this point. And so like one of this is, I mean, at least the people we deal with mainly, everyone's contractors anyway. And so it's like, well, what precedent does that set for a 1099? Because technically you're 1099, you're a contractor. And so we deal with very little W-2s in our space at the moment. And so part of me goes, well, if you're someone who is 1099, like, did that matter anyway, right? Like, technically, I don't think that mattered, right? Like, if you're a 1099, even if someone tried to force you into a non-compete or made you sign something, I don't think legally that's binding, right?
State by state basis, but yeah, as a 1099, if they say here's all the things and you sign all the things, you're in a contract. It doesn't matter if you're 1099 or W-2, but that does change state to state. California certainly has made concessions over the years to make them a not friendly state for larger companies to hire remote workers, just because they do side a bit more with the contractor, with the contributor than they do with the company. right? And so it all varies state by state.
And it also makes me wonder, what if you were sued previously over this, right? If in your contract it said non-compete 12, 24 months, and there was no bad blood, there was no sale, you weren't a top level CEO, that actually still is under those terms. Are you allowed to sue back or be like, hey, the defamation you caused me because of something that's now illegal, how do I get that back? So I wonder, I'm curious if there'll be either wording around that, or you're going to see like a bunch of small claims courts pop up and a bunch of lawsuits on the back end of this.
That's a good question, because I know that over the last several years, a lot of states have decriminalized and legalized marijuana. But I'm pretty sure there's a whole lot of people who are still locked up for selling marijuana 20 years ago. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. That's a good thought.
Thank you. I'm here all the time. I don't have a Patreon, but maybe soon if you guys want to donate a cup of coffee. Isn't that what people do? Hey, buy me a cup of coffee if you like enjoying listening to us rant. I think you're right, though. The solution's definitely going to be culture. Because here's the thing. If for whatever reason you're running a business and then you think you're safe because you had people sign non-competes, and so you're like, well, I know this person's going to stick with me because if they leave, then they're going to be out of this industry, for a year or 2 years. And so then you're not willing really to negotiate with advancement in pays. You're not willing to give concessions around vacations or things like that. And you're just like, hey, you signed this contract, live with it. You're right. People are now going to be like, listen, I'm the non-compete you made me sign doesn't exist. It's not real. So I'm just going to go leave and then just go work for the guy down the street where they have better hours or they have better pay or they just treat people better. Or in general, it's just a better culture. Like you make the statement all the time about First Form and why they blew up, and it's not for nothing. Like their culture is impeccable. Like it's a great place. They literally built a huge warehouse gym. Just you can go in, you can film content if you're one of their influencers. Like it's a sick place. Like culture, not only because of the time we're in, but also because of this. Like culture and community, always going to go back. If you have a winning culture, it's not only great for your business, but you're going to attract the A players that you hear, people on social media talk about, in entrepreneur space. Like, well, you need to attract A players. How do you do that? Well, you build a culture of winning and a culture of togetherness, and one that people do feel supported, right? I'm not saying you have to sit around, hold hands, and meditate together, but if you start adding those elements and make it fun, like entrepreneurship is hard. There's a lot of points where it sucks, especially if you are the business owner. It sucks. It's tough. You got to do the stuff nobody else wants to do. You have to have the conversations nobody else wants to have, and you have to work the hours nobody else will because it is your baby. Yes, you can outsource. Yes, you can have 100 VAs. It doesn't matter. You still got to work, and you still got to do a lot of work. So if you don't have the culture that's around that and supportive and conducive to that type of atmosphere, like you're probably going to lose eventually either way. You're especially now with this going into effect, people are going to have lots of options to go in and help a lot of great people.
Yeah, it absolutely will. I think that, and we touched on this on the last episode, and I'll invoke it really quick, but self-determination theory, every human desires three things, and one of them is a sense of relatedness, and we call that community, right? That togetherness. And so this is where culture is so important, and building a culture that people want to be a part of is now just part of getting a seat at the table, right? And so this is where it also becomes more beneficial for the people at the contributing level, because this is where I'm going to tell you, start looking for your purpose. Start living a life that is mission driven and purpose filled, because you are going to start seeing companies be more culture minded than ever, more mission driven than ever. And so this is the opportunity for so many people to get a new job, to go into a new industry, to find something that actually fulfills them, where they do get that sense of community because they belong to part of an amazing culture. They get that sense of a path to mastery because there's an upward trajectory, and it is the right things in place, and a sense of autonomy, which is freedom to create, freedom to contribute to something that's bigger than yourself, right? And so now more than ever in the future, getting those things dialed in when you are the employer is going to be important. But if you are the person on the ground floor level, it's going to be a better time for you to find people just like you and become part of an amazing culture. And I would highly encourage you to do that, because then you are part of something bigger than yourself, everyone moving in the right direction. And that is what it takes to actually change the world in a positive way anyways. So I think overall, this is going to be a net positive.
Yeah, it's literally around those famous words of Jordan Peterson. That's what I actually put in my story today, was purpose and meaning. Because he talks about responsibility. Just take on more responsibility, and you'll eventually find some meaning and ultimately your purpose in life once you keep doing that. And it made me think of, like, there was the sound clip. I believe it was a country song where it's "Don't ask me how I just did it. Don't ask me how I did it. I just did, and it was hard." I don't know if you've seen those sound bites on people like doing things, but yeah, it's a country song. The guy singing it definitely has a lot of twang, but a lot of people like put that 7-second clip up of them doing stuff. But I mean, that's true. Like,
yeah,
I just did it, and it was hard. That's all there is to it. And I've kind of thought about recently, and like what I've been really putting my attention towards is, like, when people start asking you, man, how do you do all that? How do you do it? It seems like you're everywhere all the time. You're doing all these things. You're probably on the right track. If people aren't asking you that, there's probably more you could do. You could definitely shoulder more responsibility.
Yeah. The true litmus test is, how often are you hearing your name? Right? If you're not hearing your name a lot, and if you're not hearing your name a lot as far as gratitude and things like that, you're probably not doing enough. You're not contributing enough. And so, yeah, the difference between a boy and a man is responsibility. And that's it. The more responsibility that you shoulder, the more purpose you will definitely find. I agree with that 100%.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. We're going to be doing 2 episodes a week. On Friday, we'll have some Q&A. So if you have any questions around business, life, meaning, the pursuit of happiness, whatever it may be, make sure to hit up Michael or myself. Cam Explains. Michael, yours is Michael_Clifford_
Michael
82.
Anthony 82. Yeah. See, I can't be Michael Clifford because there's some emo guitarist boy who's famous named Michael Clifford in a band. So it's just never going to happen.
You could be him. I mean, how good are they? Are they good?
I have no idea.
I feel like you got to listen to them and understand, like, who your alter ego, if they're good or not.
I refuse. He's taking my Instagram handle. Forget that
guy. Slap him with a non-compete. There's only one Michael Clifford here.
That's right.
All right, guys, hit us up on Instagram if you have any questions. We'll definitely put up in our story as well by tomorrow to see if you guys have any questions, if you're listening to this sooner than later. If not, just DM us if you have questions, and we'll definitely put them into the show on Friday. We'll have eventually our live stream up. So right now you guys are probably listening to this podcast, unless it's a small clip on social. We'll for sure have the live stream up and ready in the next couple of weeks. We want to live stream to YouTube and Twitter throughout the day. So we'll have a couple of those things coming, as well as we'll have some guests up and coming, which Michael and I have to solidify this schedule, but I already have 2-3 people that I'm super excited to bring on and do more of this off-the-cuff style with them. I think it's going to be super fun. Any words of wisdom to leave us with here today, Michael?
Get to work. Whatever it is.
Get to work.
Get to work.
Get to work. Don't ask me how we did it. We just did it, and it was hard.
That's right.
Have a great day, guys.
See ya.